But at their best, the Jupiterian view offers everyone the ability to be in the world, but not of it, by reminding you of how big you are. And I don't mean physically. I mean, as an entity, you are enormous. In fact, you are so enormous that the most excruciatingly limiting features of your life are dwarfed by the magnitude of who you really are. And that Jupiterian view is vital to counter the delusional view of our times. And I don't know if there's ever been a time in history as riddled with delusion as our time. Maybe partially, maybe first and foremost back in Atlantis, when a small group of priest scientists set themselves up above everyone else and forgot that they were serving the high gods of spirit and confused themselves into thinking they were the high gods of spirit. That was delusional, but that delusion didn't spread through the entire small population that then existed on planet Earth. We have mass delusion right now in the world. In the United States, politically, there's one brand of the delusions of the right, and there's a whole other brand of the delusions of the left. And there's an intersecting point where the delusions of the right and left become one and the same. And throughout the world, this delusional state is pretty much commandeering the view of collective consciousness, the view of mass consciousness, the view of the species. And when you're stuck with that view, the view from the limited self, the view from the one stuck in scarcity, which is underlying the great delusion of our times, is a condition of scarcity. That condition plays out on a personal level as well as a collective level as there's not enough. Oh my God, there's not enough. And you can fill in the tail end of that statement with just about anything you want. It still comes back to the scarcity delusion. There's not enough what? There's not enough money. There's not enough time. There's not enough love. As if they were a finite units of love in some love bank. Like there's 6,273,049 units of love. And if somebody somewhere in the world takes 20 of those units, then there's 20 less for me. Or that there's a finite amount of time stored up somewhere. By God, we're going to run out of time. And what an incredible thing that would be, actually, if we could run out of time. Wow. I would be really happy to see time run out, because that time, that chronological linear Western clock time, took as many centuries to create as did the pyramids in Egypt. It's just a modern, limiting, distorted view. So the scarcity delusion underlies the modern delusions of the right and the left and the center and the extremes and the middle and the top and the bottom and the inside and the outside and all the other delusions. But when you see through those stories, because that's what they are, it becomes clear that something awesome, astonishing, and unprecedented is also occurring at this time. And that is the arrival of the human species. Now, on first glance, it may seem to you that I just made a very puzzling statement, because hasn't the human species arrived? And the answer is yes, partially. The human species has partially arrived. We do exist. Insofar as anything exists in the physical plane, we exist. You know, like fire hydrants and Chevrolets, that there is a human being that lives. We belong there in the physical realm. So yes, we have arrived. But the true nature of humanity has been having a long, hard time trying to get here. And so the arrival that we have is a partial state where we go through the world between birth and death, manifesting a fraction of our greater potential, thinking a fraction of our thoughts, though the thought plane is one of the least limited of all. So there's a lot of freedom in thought, but that freedom gets squandered when it attaches itself to obsolete stories, tales of scarcity, tales of hyperpolarization that the human species is still struggling with. So this amazing, unprecedented event that's also occurring at the same time and in many of the same places where the delusion is most rooted is the full arrival of the human species in planet Earth. What does this mean? What does this bode? Well, first, it presumes that you haven't arrived. I haven't arrived. We haven't arrived. No one has fully arrived, except insofar as you've incarnated the love that first sent you here. Where you have incarnated the love, you have arrived. And that arrival of love, whether it comes down the sexual romantic channel or the parent to child channel or the child to parent to channel or the existential love for humanity or the animal kingdom or love of nature or love of music, love of Beatles and traffic and Jimi Hendrix and all those other things that I learned to love in my early acid trips. Whatever way that the love comes down, that part of you is starting to fully arrive. And the paradox of arrival is that one of the first things that occurs when your greater multidimensional nature arrives in your normal, limited human condition is that you become aware of many things that you weren't aware of when you were only partly here. This is a crucial point on the road to enlightenment, the road to arrival. It's that when more of you arrives into the normal mundane condition, which at this time of history, normalcy is anything but. Normalcy is incredibly abnormal. There's nothing normal about living in a world without love and truth. This is not normal. It's an imprisoned state, an enchained state. When more of you shows up into that limited state, one of the first things you become aware of is how limited it is and how lonely it can feel to be a one-eyed person in the land of the blind. So there's this moment, there's this rigorous challenge in the initiation that when you begin to show up in some form of love, self-love, love of God, love of life, love of the universe, love of the stars, love of your children, love of the rain, love of sexuality, any love, where you start to show up more, the grueling initiation that usually follows is, now that I am awakening, what do I do with everything unawake? That never used to bother me anywhere near to this extent when I was less awake. There's a tendency at that part of the initiation of the earth journey to succumb to doubt and think that you're going crazy. And during a time when mass consciousness is insane, normalcy ends up looking crazy. It's not normal to live in a world without love. It's not normal to go through life as part of a species that's living as if its truth were somewhere else. And of course, we all know it's a tacit, unspoken psychic collective agreement not to be yourself. We all know you can't send a kid to school for 20 years and have them be themselves. What if they take their clothes off? What if they masturbate in the classroom? What if they paint pictures on the bathroom wall? We can't have that. We could have everything except people being real. We can't have realness. That's the tacit, unspoken karmic agreement. That's the state that exists as normalcy. It's the great taboo. Be anything except yourself. Modern mass culture is afraid of one thing: people being themselves. The liberal political establishment of my country is pissed off crazy at Bernie Sanders, not because of his policies, but because he's awakening the rabble. He's awakening the masses so that they just don't come out once every 4 years and press a button and go back to sleep, but that they stay awake. And the liberal establishment that rules the political halls of my country is infuriated with that, because you're not supposed to be awake. Because if you were awake, you would never put up with the bullshit. So it's important to realize in the journey of awakening, of arrival, of the fuller arrival of your nature and the nature of the whole species, that as more parts of you arrive, things rarely get better, at least subjectively. It really feels like, I'm arrived. Mark Borax's greater nature. It took 65 fucking years, but he showed up. This is amazing. This is incredible. Everything is amazing. It doesn't usually show up that way unless you're on a really good ayahuasca medicine journey. Instead, the way it usually shows up is, holy shit, I never realized that we human beings hurt each other so much. Holy shit, I never saw that side of my wife Marcella before. Whoa, what the hell do I do with this? And so the path to enlightenment is usually marked more by discontent than by bliss, though it needs to have a good component of bliss underlying it. There has to be this blend. You know, you need at least a good 15 to 17% of bliss in your core alchemy, which at times radiates up, you know, like during orgasm to 99% bliss, or during music for me, when I'm making music, when I'm playing songs or listening to a song, like I did the other night when I heard a live Grateful Dead song for the first time, Days Between. The David Lemieux, who had compiled their latest CD, decided to go into the final 3 years of the band before Jerry Garcia died, and only put in this album the live songs that were introduced for the first time in those years. And I was sitting in my car writing songs, which I do a lot because I don't usually have a warm space to play music in the middle of the night when I like to write songs at 3 a.m. I was in my car and I was taking a break from my songwriting and warming the car up because it's cold in Vermont. And before I was going to turn off the engine again, and that song came on, Days Between. And I'd never heard that song anywhere, not only not heard that version of it, that live version of it. I'd never heard the song. And my Honda CR-V has an incredible driver's seat that reclines less than horizontal to where my head is actually lower than my thighs. And it's like going into traction and releasing lower back tension. And so I did that at 3 a.m. when this song came on, Sirius XM Grateful Dead channel. And I put my head down lower than my legs. And I was immersed in, 14 minutes or so of this incredible song. That was the tail end of Jerry, when he was caught in addiction to heroin. And he was singing from the core of his soul about the days between. And I absorbed that at 3 a.m. I highly recommend 3 a.m. as the time when the collective psychic wavelengths are clearer than ever, wherever you live, because there's less people awake. That's when I do my best thinking and songwriting, is, between 2 and 4 a.m, because almost nobody's awake then where you live. And the collective psychic wavelengths are filled with their dream selves rather than their distorted karmic selves. Boy, did I sink deeply in to that song. I instantly went in the house and I ordered the CD, even though it hadn't come out yet, but I just got it in the mail a few days ago. And so, days between. Days between what and what? These are the days between the stranglehold of the illusion of limitation and the fuller arrival of the species. Jupiter in Capricorn sees things from an Olympian perspective, sees things from the highest dimension, unaffected by the karmic limitations of the species, the obsolete stories that we insist upon. And every story that has no love in it is a false story. The only true stories have love somewhere in them. Even if it's twisted love, even if it's love yearning, even if it's love wanting to happen, there's got to be love in a story for it to be real. And that invites you to show up that much more. These are the days between the stranglehold of the trance of normalcy. Normalcy. What we consider to be normal, this world of kids who are trained to sit up straight in class for 40 hours a week and then get into a job and sit up straight for 40 hours a week, and then get into a marriage and sit up straight in the marriage for 40 years, and then hoping to win the lottery or retire before they actually get to be who they really are and live their dream self, is a trance, is not reality. Trance is thick at this point, because the vast majority of human beings live that way, as if their life were somewhere else that maybe one day they'll get it. That trance dulls the love muscle, the love gene, the love DNA. And Francis Crick was tripping on acid when he discovered DNA. I just love that story. The DNA love gene gets dulled by what we call normalcy. To imagine it different, imagine a world where parents, teachers, educators, politicians, priests, rabbis, nuns, ministers, all authority figures beamed and verbally stated the message into children. You are not here to make anyone else happy. You are here to follow the truth of your soul and not let anybody talk you out of that. We do not care if you grow up and marry a man, a woman, an elephant, a gorilla, a Hindu, a Baptist, a Buddhist, a midget, a dwarf, a giant, nobody. All we care is that you follow the truth of your soul and not let anyone talk you out of it. Imagine that world. Because that world lives inside this world, the trance of normalcy. Underneath this trance state that we call normalcy, which only seems normal because everyone else is doing it. And by the way, when anyone breaks out of the trance, they seem crazy. That's the irony. That's the paradox. Like St. Francis going to work in his father's stall in the marketplace in Italy, tearing off his clothes and running through the marketplace and getting the fuck out of there and going to the mountains. I lived in Italy. I lived in Bibiane, Italy. And from my porch balcony, I could see the mountain that a nobleman gave to St. Francis for his ministry. I could look at that mountain every morning. Like St. Francis, if you tear off your clothes and run naked through the marketplace, you're the one who's going to seem abnormal. When you awaken from the trance to realize the love that you are, you gain the Jupiterian Cancer vantage point of seeing into the real nature of what's going on here, which is a story of love. It's love that's taking a god-awful long time to happen. And it's a story of love. To imagine it different is to imagine a world in which every authority figure said to every child from the beginning, I don't care if you take your clothes off and run through the streets and paint the house flaming pink and purple. I don't give a shit what the neighbors say. I just care that you listen to your inner voice and trust it and follow it. And that's what your teacher said in daycare and kindergarten and 7th grade and high school and college. And that's what your politicians say, and your doctors and your lawyers and your cops and your army and your politicians and your kings and queens and neighbors and priests and nuns and rabbis. And anyone who doesn't give that message is full of shit. And so, since few of us grew up in that world, we have to say it to ourselves and each other and our children. Boy, do we have to say it to our children. Kids, teenagers, with a greater suicide rate than at any other time in history, you're here to be yourself. My generation made an awful mess. And we're going to help you clean it by getting back down to what it's all about, which is love and truth and realness. The only thing that's going to turn around the trance of limitation to the higher viewpoint of Jupiter and Capricorn during the next year is to get real, to be real. I'm not telling you to stop suffering. If you're suffering, be with that suffering so it can give you its lessons. Don't curse it. Don't blame your suffering. Find some way to love it and change it from within. Being real with ourselves and each other is going to carry us from the days between, from the almost species to the fuller arrival. And just remember, the more that you fully arrive, the more that you have to deal with that you didn't have to deal with before you got here. Okay, Marcella, do we want to open this up for questions?
Yes, let's open it up for questions. If you have one or a comment, please raise your hand or go ahead and just unmute yourself and weave into the conversation.
And if you're Capricorn, we would especially give you first opportunity to jump into the spotlight.
Yeah, thank you. I, as people might be composing a thought, I'm not Capricorn, but I'll just weave in here the intense physical impact I'm feeling when you're describing this energy that's coming through and how it meets in our bodies, just the incarnational process. And yeah, it just feels like something in that way, to be able to really keep working with our bodies to really expand and allow for a fluidness to happen so that we're actually able to see what's possible through our bodies and our lives through having more energy coming through like this.
Yes. Yeah, the physical body is such a beautiful Capricornian instrument of universal design, because your body brings your mind and your spirit down from the clouds into the sensory human experience here. And your greater body connects you to the whole galaxy, to the whole cosmoverse, to the multidimensional experience of being a network where you're your body and you're also the greater body of your past lives and your family and your genealogy and your future selves and your ancestors. And that little human body that most of us identify with as me, as I, as this is me, sometimes feels like hopelessly outmatched by the sheer hugeness of the energies that blow through. So we have some work to do to remove our fear of being as great and magical as we really are.
Yeah, thank you. Does somebody else want to weave in?
I have a sort of association also with the message of affirming for ourselves and each other and our children and our child within that didn't get the message that we, should be ourselves. Something that I'm working with just globally for myself and being aware of right now is also the message about reversing or unreversing the messages about what we are as people when we come in as children. And this kind of built-in, maybe Piscean era message coming from religion a lot, that your essence, what you inherently are, is not divine, and it's not, something's wrong with it. And that is one of the reasons that it's not okay for you to be yourself. And so I just I'm just offering that as something I'm working with very closely, is however we language it, affirming for, that because we're here, even in bodies, and to express it fully through the body, which I love hearing you say that, Marcella, and I agree. It has to be expressed through the body, is also the fundamental reflection and affirmation and remembrance that the essence of what we're trying to give ourselves permission to live is sacred, even if through the human experience it's messy and weird and wild, and it maybe has to be to rebalance. This is really important to me, sort of undoing what I identify as this Piscean reversal, that there's something inherently bad and wrong, right, with our essence, and that's why we shouldn't show up fully and express and explore and love fully.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that in, Ceres. The giving ourselves permission to be, just making your energy field uncontested territory instead of it always being under contest, as if your basic right to exist and shine and love is not yet granted. That's a permission, that's a moment when you grant yourself absolute permission to be yourself, is a potent initiation. And shortcutting methods like LSD and ayahuasca and things of that sort tend to thrust you right through the permission into the state of just beingness. And then when the acid wears off, you have to go back and retrace some of those steps and really grant yourself permission to dwell in that state of cosmic oneness. And because there's a lot of things going on now that nobody would ever want to be one with, it's quite an initiation. It's quite a protracted, bare-knuckled fight to the finish with the shadow. But a very deep passage is achieved when you give yourself eternal permission to be. Just like a mountain or a blade of grass, you get to be. The blade of grass is probably not sitting there doubting its blade of grassness. And the mountain is probably not spending a lot of psychotherapy sessions trying to grant itself mountainness. The swallows that fly through the sky are probably not twisted around sideways trying to grant themselves swallowness. So why should the human being be so wrapped up in canceling its own existence when it's just such a funner game to exist, to be, to get to be? This is the weird distortion of our time. And in this next year of Jupiter and Capricorn, the beingness is growing, is increasing, and it carries with it added viewpoints of things that we haven't yet dealt with. So it's not always fun, but at the core of it is this permission to be. So thank you for bringing that in, Ceres.
Oh, it looks like Sylvina. Oh, maybe I think we have a few hands popping up, and I'm popping up too, but I'm going to go with the guests here popping up because I have you after this as well. Was that, I saw Sylvina, did you want to come in? And Gray, did you want to come in?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Sylvina, why don't you go first, then we'll have Gray.
So I have it's a question, where is the thin line? Because I often see, because you're talking about children and being ourselves and then giving them the message that they have to be themselves. It's the most important thing. But where is the thin line? Because I see that sometimes it's mistaken to everything is allowed. Just express yourself, no matter who is there, also being with themselves, you know. And I don't know. For me, it's a trigger because I see it sometimes. It's the whole. I feel that the whole is not respected, or the sacred is not respected sometimes with this. And yeah, I don't know if you understand what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, the granting all beings the permission to be who they are isn't the same thing as accepting every form of behavior. Because if you're granting yourself absolute permission to be who you are, while you're granting some child that permission, then you're going to be close enough with your own living experience to realize when you need to put up boundaries, when you need to teach lessons, when you need to put a stop to certain behavior. Granting beings their basic permission to be is on a much more intrinsic level. It's very close to the psychic center, that in between you and your psychic center, nobody gets the right to cancel your existence, including yourself. You're claiming a beingness on a level that's separate from saying that everything you do is allowed or everything that you do is wonderful. So I'm not advocating everything that every child and adult does is wonderful, and that's what it means to grant yourself the permission to be. But what I am advocating is that your right to be yourself needs to be unquestionable. So I'm working on a deeper level than behavior. When you take that right out into the social world of behaviors, boundaries are good, healthy things. I'm a firm believer in boundaries. But I'm dissolving the boundary between a person and her own right to exist.
Yeah, I'll just sort of tag on too, because I feel like when Mark was talking about the way we have to mine our environment so that people aren't talking us out of really the truth, talking us out of our own truth, we also have to actually remind ourselves of all the voices that talk ourselves out of being our own truth. And I think this part of childhood and all those impressions is that it gets so imprinted early on to sort of self-negate that it takes a process to actually restructure our interior relationship and design to actually be able to be more affirmative, that our essence is pure and whole and honest within its own makeup as something that deserves the right to exist, which in some ways really does get undermined. Then it makes it really difficult to even feel like we can manage behaviors from a place of wholeness. So I really love this conversation because, like Ceres was bringing in, it's just so critical to the development of our own capacity to freely be and behave in ways that work, because they both, it's like they're both at work.
Yeah. And Marcella, how much longer do you have to facilitate this teleclass?
I think we can take a gray, and then if you want to wrap it up, that'd be super.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the key word here, like Ms. Marcella just said, is I think freedom is the what you're really trying to get at here. You know, freedom, where everybody's feels pretty constrained. There's a lot of just people are imprisoned by like you're saying, what's they think they're supposed to be, or their jobs, or everything. So yeah, I think
Yes.
freedom's a key component here.
Yes. Yeah. And the final thing I want to add to that, Gray, is that the deepest understanding of freedom that I know of is not the freedom from anything. It's the freedom toward something. Because for a long time in the human experience, it will seem as if freedom will occur once I'm no longer something, once I'm no longer married to that woman, once I'm no longer stuck to that job, once I get away from something, I'll be free. And that, on a deeper inspection, turns out to be an escapist form of freedom that's not the most mature version, the most fully seasoned and magical version, which has to do with the freedom to fully arrive and become present as this earthy but magical multidimensional creature that you are. When you have the freedom to arrive, which the human species is longing for, yearning for, the fuller arrival, that freedom takes your physical nature and turns it into this radiant hologram that radiates the news of your arrival through all the different dimensions, including the physical. And thank you all for joining me on the CWR Live for Tuesday, December 10th, 2019, the Olympian view from on high, tracking with Jupiter in Capricorn from December of 2019 through December of 2020. And until we meet again, may your karma turn to grace.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mark, Marcella. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.